Department of Internal Affairs Clinics of the city of Belgorod, Lydia Vasilievna Kazmina, article on the website. Alas, such is the bitter truth. We eat mushrooms. People eat mushrooms, concluded a doctor, laboratory assistant with a university education, who for a quarter of a century has been examining under a microscope the pathogens of all possible diseases in her numerous patients. It started in the year 1980. A young man with a strange disease was sent for examination to the laboratory. From time to time, his temperature would rise to 38 degrees for no apparent reason. It seemed like nothing serious, but this slightly ill man seriously told the lab technicians, "Girls, I feel like I'm going to die soon." They didn't believe him because the treating doctor suspected he only had malaria, its instigator. For a whole month they tried to find it in the patient's blood, but they couldn't. And the patient, unexpectedly for the doctors, deteriorated very quickly. Then they were horrified to discover he had septic endocarditis, an infectious damage to the heart muscle, which they initially overlooked. They failed to save the guy. Kazmina didn't throw away the blood of the deceased. Examining it again under a microscope, she unexpectedly discovered tiny organisms with a nuclear core in it. For 2 months she tried to identify them, asking clinical lab technicians and looking through bacteriology atlases, but all in vain. And finally she found something similar in a book by the Moldovan author Schreut. There were photographs and descriptions of strange microorganisms, Mycoplasmas, which do not have a thick cell wall. They are only covered by a thin membrane, so they easily change their shape. For example, a spherical mycoplasma can stretch out like a worm and squeeze into a narrow gap in a human cell. Even viruses, which are smaller in size, are not capable of this, let alone spherical mycoplasmas. In fact, the latter can extract nutrients from the cell without even penetrating it. Most often, these pieces of protoplasm simply attach to the cells and suck juices out of them through the pores. But as often happens in science, the first discovery raised more questions than answers. In Schreut's book, the researcher found a second contender for the role of the septicemic endocarditis awakener. And both in appearance and behavior very similar to Mycoplasma was the so-called L form of bacteria. It appears when a patient starts to be treated with penicillin, which prevents the formation of a shell in bacteria. Doctors used to think that without it parasites would die. But then it turned out that they can live without a shell and even cause diseases. But they behave very unusually, as doctors say, atypically. Such parasites are very difficult to diagnose. Finally, a third contender for the role of killer has been found, the smallest chlamydia. Some scientists called it a spore of a fungus, others a virus. But all agreed that this dwarf of the micro world freely penetrates into cells and parasitizes inside them. So both chlamydia and mycoplasmas cause diseases with similar clinical manifestations. It is impossible to determine by symptoms who caused the mischief, a membrane or cellular parasite. Alas, the first attempts to identify the secret killer gave birth to 3 versions, each of which could turn out to be false. But these searches were not in vain. If Kazmina now found something similar in someone's blood, something that instructions and manuals did not require to pay attention to, she nevertheless raised the alarm so that doctors would not overlook the disease, as happened with the unfortunate guy. And again, Trichomonads. In 1981st year, a pregnant woman with a diagnosis of an unclear origin of lichen was sent to the laboratory and given the instruction, find the malaria pathogen. Then the lab technicians sowed the patient's blood in a nutrient medium. In one sowing, familiar Kazminoi actually grew, and in another, oh horror, tiny trichomonads appeared, the same flagellates that, according to official medicine, cause only venereal disease. And in the opinion of the majority of other civilization skeptics, I filled the alarm and put all the Belgorod specialists on their feet, Kazmina says. But they couldn't explain the results of the analysis. Then I urgently went to Moscow to the Gamaleya Institute of Microbiology. There they confirmed that there are mycoplasmas in the patient's blood, but they refused to comment on the presence of trichomonads and did not advise on how to treat the patient. But we will teach you how to properly sow mycoplasma, the confused microbiologist told me. But I was glad for that too. I thought that the skills acquired could help me identify the pathogens of almost all diseases of unknown etiology. But when I started sowing mycoplasmas in Belgorod, A lot of other stuff grew next to these membrane parasites, which I could not identify. Indeed, these microorganisms were characterized by a great variety of forms. Round oval, resembling rods with one nucleus or several, separate and connected in a chain. It was enough to drive a doctor laboratory assistant mad. Then she decided to study the books of the classics of microbiology. In one scientist's book, it was written that trichomonads reproduce by spores. How to understand this, since spores are found in fungi and trichomonad is considered an animal? If the scientist's opinion is correct, then these flagellates should form a fungal colony in humans. In some patient analyses, a structure resembling a fungal colony was visible under the microscope. At first I was surprised. What are these threads? Recalls Lydia Vasilievna. Maybe it was lint or the patient had shed this dust from their clothes. But then she was surprised to find that the threads were made up of single-celled parasites. Indeed, not from trichomonads, but from Mycoplasmas. So could it be the same microorganism but at different stages of its development? Then it's not surprising that trichomonads form spores about Mycoplasma mycelium. Simply a mushroom is growing in our body. Official science has recognized the existence of flagellate trichomonads, but only in the urogenital tract. And Lydia Vasilievna often found these parasites in blood, mammary gland and other organs. How did these giants of the micro-world, which reach 30 microns and cannot crawl through cracks, get into them from the sexual organs? Maybe they really do release tiny spores that easily penetrate into the blood and spread throughout the body. I didn't have the courage before, admits the researcher, to tell urologists that trichomonads are capable of traveling through the body. But now I have serious grounds for such a statement, and I'm not afraid to talk about them to specialists. But not only that, urologists assert that in the flagellate form are found dead trichomonads. Influenced by medication, the parasites have reportedly shed their flagella. However, Kazmina believes these trichomonads are healthy, as she found them in patients' analyses months after treatment. These perfectly intact trichomonads would have disintegrated long ago if they were dead. If they were really killed, they probably resurrected afterwards. But it's unlikely that parasites are capable of such miracles. Most likely something similar to what happens with bacteria during medical treatment happened to them. External organs dissolve while internal ones remain. The dust falls from the eyes. Kazmina continued her research, finding more and more inconsistencies with the generally accepted theories. Very often in the blood of sick people, she simultaneously detected two pathogens, chlamydia and ureaplasma. Among the sick were many elderly women, and these parasites appeared in them only recently, when they could not have been infected sexually. Where did the pathogens of venereal diseases come from? Here we need to make a small digression. The laboratories of the Sexually Transmitted Disease Clinic work with a constant contingent of people, thinking about the question of where the chlamydia and ureaplasma came from in innocent grandmothers. They remembered that many years ago these patients had trichomonads in their tests. Checked the documents and sure enough, by the way, something similar happened to men. Once they were treated for trichomonas urethritis, and now in their tests were visible small creatures reminiscent of trichomonads but without flagella. It was thought that older people had long gotten rid of the awakeners of venereal diseases. The parasites were killed by medicines, and from the analysis it turned out that the parasites remained alive but changed their form and habits and hid in the body to avoid provoking chemical attacks from doctors. And when they had already forgotten about trichomonads, they suddenly came out from under the field, again arousing venereal diseases to the great shame of the hardened old men. How to explain these metamorphoses? The key to the mystery was a curious story that took place in the Republic of Chad. In 1 year, all the children born there turned out to be sick with encephalopathy, and for some reason, unripe coconuts fell from all the palms. This fact interested scientists, and they determined that the diseases of people and plants were caused by the same parasite, Spiroplasma, which is a relative of Mycoplasma and Ureaplasma. The newly discovered pathogen felt great both in coconuts and in the brains of children and in the placenta of mothers. It was a truly universal parasite that freely penetrated into any organs of people and plants, finding them equally suitable for life. Who possesses such amazing abilities? I thought about this question for a long time, continues Lydia Vasilievna, and a year ago I completely unexpectedly got an answer. It was these microorganisms that I found in the analyses many years ago, but I could not identify them. And here everything was explained extremely simply and clearly. I am very grateful to Mycurian for this discovery. Would it seem, what relation does the mushroom slime mold have to the smallest microorganisms that Lydia Vasilievna has been looking at under a microscope for a quarter of a century? Yes, the most direct, as Mycurian writes, the slime mold goes through several stages of development. From spores grow amoebas and flagellates. They frolic in the slimy mass of the mushroom, merging into larger cells with several nuclei and then form a fruiting body. The slime mold is a classic mushroom on a knife, which, drying out, throws out spores, and everything repeats. At first, Kazmina didn't believe her eyes. She rummaged through a pile of scientific literature about slime molds and found a lot of confirmations of her guess in it. In appearance and properties, the pseudopods of amoeba were strikingly similar to the zoospores of ureoplasm with 2 flagella, to trichomonads that had thrown off flagella and lost their shells, to Mycoplasma, etc. The fruiting bodies of slime mold surprisingly resembled polyps in the nasopharynx and gastrointestinal tract, papillomas on the skin, flat cell cancer, and other tumors. It turned out that the same slime mold that can be seen on rotten logs and stumps lives in our body. Previously, scientists could not recognize it due to narrow specialization. Some studied chlamydia, others Mycoplasma, others Trichomonads. None of them thought that these were 3 stages of development of one fungus which the 4th group studied. There is a huge number of known slime molds. The largest of them, Fuligo, is up to half a meter in diameter, and the smallest can only be seen under a microscope. Which slime mold exactly? Do they coexist with us? There can be many of them, explains Kazmina. But so far I have only identified one. This is the most common slime mold, wolf's milk. Scientifically it's called Lycogala. It usually crawls on needles between bark and wood, loves dampness and rawness, so it only comes out in humid weather. Botanists have even learned to lure this creature out from under the bark. They drop a piece of filtered paper soaked in water onto the stump and cover everything with a dark bell jar, and after a few hours they lift the bell jar. And they see a flat methane creature with water beads on the stump which crawled out onto the paper. In the unforgettable times, Lichigala adapted to life in the human body and since then has happily moved from the stump into this raw, dark and warm home on 2 legs. I found traces of Lichogala, its spores and trichomonads in various stages in the hymen, milk iron, mother's shake, prostate, bladder bubble and other organs. Lichogala very cunningly evades the immune forces of the human body. If the body is weakened, it does not have time to recognize and neutralize the rapidly changing cells that make up Lichigala. As a result, it manages to release spores that are carried by the blood, grow in convenient places, and form fruiting bodies. Lydia Vasilievna never asserts that she has found a universal cure for all diseases of unknown origin. She is only certain of one thing, that the flu fungus Lycogala causes papillomas, cysts, polyps and squamous cell cancer. In her opinion, a tumor forms from the non-reproductive cells of a person and the elements of the mature body of the fungus. They have already gone through the stages of ureoplasm, amoeboid, trichomonad, plasmodium, chlamydia, and are now forming a cancerous tumor. Doctors can't explain why new formations sometimes disintegrate, but if we assume that the new formation is the fruiting bodies of the fungus, then, in Kazmina's opinion, everything becomes clear. After all, in nature, these bodies inevitably die off every year. A similar rhythm is preserved in the human body. The fruiting bodies die off to release spores and regenerate, forming plasmodium in other organs. The well-known metastasis of the tumor occurs, although it very rarely manifests itself in a single number. Usually, as oncologists say, primary multiple tumors form at once in several places. Lydia Vasilievna explains this puzzle with the natural properties of lymph nodes. The same Lycogala forms several spheres. Now doctors and scientists have hoped that the main biological enemy of mankind, The universal disease trigger of unknown etiology has finally been recognized. Before, narrow specialists looked at it in parts, some at the buds, some at the blades, some at the tail. But only the synthesis of these knowledge allowed to recognize the superparasite and find its Achilles' heel. Kazmina was the first to try to do this, but she was surprised to find that folk healers had long discovered the vulnerable spot of the tear duct. They learned to cure many diseases which, in their opinion, cause mucus. Read tear duct parasites love warmth and sloth. This is what Lydia Vasilyevna told me during another training in Moscow at the doctor's improvement courses. If we move little, eat a lot, drink, sleep, give in to other excesses, then we will turn our body into a garbage can with rotting products in which disease-causing microbes will multiply. And they will start to devour our organs, that is, our body will decompose into inorganic substances. We will literally become like rotting logs on which mushrooms grow because it is the mushrooms that play a major role in our decomposition. Just don't think that I discovered this. Medieval doctors knew about killer mushrooms. In the book Healing Powers, there is a curious story about how ancient Armenian doctors imagined the development of diseases. Opening the bodies of the dead and deceased, they found a lot of mucus and phlegm in the gastrointestinal tract, but not in all the deceased, only in those who in life succumbed to laziness, gluttony and other excesses, receiving numerous diseases as punishment. Doctors believed that if a person eats a lot and moves a little, then not all food is absorbed by the body. Part of it rots, covered with mucus and mold, that is, a mushroom bed begins to grow in the stomach. The mold throws out spores, microscopic mushroom seeds, which get into the blood with nutrients and are carried throughout the body. In weakened organs, spores begin to germinate, forming the fruiting bodies of mushrooms. This is how cancer begins. Ancient doctors believed that mushrooms are thrown out first. White paradise is plaques and clots in the vessels having a white color. The second stage is gray paradise, when mushrooms form joint swellings and other new formations of a gray color. Finally, black paradise corresponds to the modern meaning of this word, only black. It's not because malignant tumors and metastases have such a color, rather it's the color of the aura of affected organs. Not all of us will die from cancer. And although there are a huge number of disputes in our body, they, in Kazmina's opinion, do not harm as long as we maintain health at a high level. But the spores grow and turn into mushrooms if we weaken the immune system. In any case, it's not worth giving up then. Folk healers have long found a way to control these mushrooms. Kish poganka. It's not my job to cure cancer and the diseases that precede it, says Kazmina. My task is early diagnosis and I am definitely doing it. In one specific case, when a patient is threatened with squamous cell carcinoma, it's a very common misfortune. For example, 80% of malignant lung diseases cause squamous cell carcinoma. That is the tear duct lichenoid epidermis. I am well aware of all the stages of its development, but I hope that scientists can help me create methods for detecting triggers of other diseases. Lydia Vasilyevna wants to find among the numerous tear ducts triggers for specific types of cancer and other scourges of civilization. But why is she sure that all of them are also caused by fungi and not some other parasites? Perhaps because almost all doctors and folk healers who can treat cancer hold similar views. So, Vladimir Adamovich Ivanov from Minsk, in his book Wisdom of Herbal Treatment, describes a method of cleansing with lemon juice and olive oil. If applied correctly, cholesterol plugs and bilirubin stones come out of the liver without pain. But the biggest success in the healer's opinion is when mucus comes out from there. In this case, he guarantees the patient that he is not at risk of liver cancer in the near future. Similar to medieval Armenian doctors, Ivanov believes that mucus causes cancer, and the best prevention of the terrible disease is the removal of mucus from the body. And his followers call mucus the cause of all disorders that occur in the body above the diaphragm. He, like Malakov, suggests treating them with urine therapy and, strangely enough, gets excellent results. Admittedly, he explains them too cleverly. In the spirit of Eastern teachings, Descartes, mucus cools and urine warms. The energy of Yang defeats the energy of Yin and so on. Kazmina believes everything is simpler. The invigorator of many diseases of unknown origin, ureoplasm, feeds on urine. This parasite can be starved by depriving it of its favorite delicacy. For example, if we drink our own urine, then the ureoplasm will crawl into the gastrointestinal tract and will happily leave our body through it. But sometimes you can lure the parasite out even through the skin by applying urine compresses and lotions to the affected area. Well, if you are against treating with urine, you can stimulate the tear duct with another drink that you might find tasty. Brack and other famous healers recommend eating beetroot and carrot in the morning or drinking fresh juice made from them. In their opinion, this is the best prevention of many ailments. How to ward off ailments. Not only Kazmina considers mushrooms to be the awakeners of the diseases of the century. The famous healer from Kiev, Boris Vasilievich Bolotov, came to a similar conclusion. He considers cancer to be a parasitism of plant cells on animals, but plants have an alkaline environment and animals have an acidic one. Therefore, in order to get rid of parasites, we need to constantly acidify our body, making their existence in it unbearable. Bolotov advises to drink as much kvass as possible, eat pickled and fermented vegetables, horseradish, etc. No less famous doctor from Novosibirsk, Konstantin Pavlovich Buteyko, agrees with him. In his opinion, carbonated water wonderfully acidifies the blood, but it is best to do this with the help of shallow breathing. Then much more carbon dioxide accumulates in the body than drinks can provide. And carbonates, in Buteyko's opinion, are like fire. Any parasites are afraid of them. That's why any mucus in the body is dissolved. A more harsh method of healing was developed by a healer from Simferopol, Tishchenko. He suggests his patients to drink a poisonous infusion of wormwood, not to get poisoned, but to expel the mucus from themselves, not through the gastrointestinal tract, but directly through the skin. To do this, you need to make compresses from beet or carrot juice on the affected organ. I myself have observed how effective such methods can be, says Kazmina. One of our patients developed a cancerous thickening in the mammary gland, and in her puncture I found Mycoplasmas and amoeboids. The tear gland had started forming a fruiting body, indicating a potential cancer risk for the woman. But our experienced oncology surgeon Nikolai Kristoforovich Sirenko, instead of surgery, suggested the patient take a common anti-inflammatory drug internally and apply a compress made of cabbage pulp to the chest. And the tear gland, scorched by the medicine, crawled out to the surface right through the skin, after which the swelling subsided and a rupture appeared on the chest. To the surprise of other doctors, the seriously ill patient began to recover. One day, a man came to Sirenko who had been operated on twice by other surgeons, but they could not help him. The cancer had spread widely. Sirenko did not consider the patient hopeless, gave strange advice in which the achievements of modern medicine were combined with folk experience. Every year, Hopeless passed the VTEK, and after 10 years he received a permanent disability. All the doctors were amazed, except for Sirenko and Kazminaya. In their opinion, the patient stayed alive because the mushroom in his body somehow got preserved. No fruiting bodies formed on it, which could have destroyed the organs and caused death. Kazmina believes that with proper care, other patients who already have widespread cancer metastases could live a long time. The main thing is not to let the tear duct bear fruit, but of course it's better not to let it get to black cancer, but to fight it at the white and grey stages, as the Armenian doctors of the Middle Ages did. For example, it treats rheumatoid arthritis beautifully. The director of the Kraseva-Borisovskogo district rest home in the Belgorod region, Vasily Mikhailovich Lysyak. He suggests a course of 17 bunches of medicinal herbs. Patients soak for a long time, sitting up to their necks in warm water, and at the end of the course they are amazed to find that the swellings on their joints, which they could not get rid of for many years, have dissolved. In Kazmina's opinion, these people have become crybabies. Mushrooms found it much more pleasant in the warm herbal broth than in sick bodies, where they are grazed every day with antibiotics and other nastiness. If they bring up diseases of the gastrointestinal tract, then a bottle of water will have to be taken inside, of course, not simple but mineral, and of course not in one sitting. Lydia Vasilievna explains the success of water treatment by the fact that it is a natural method of removing toxins from our body. At the end of the course, a large amount of tears comes out of the patient for free. After this, relief comes immediately, and a month or two later, the patient's condition significantly improves as he has gotten rid of the main cause of civilization diseases. But let those who have nowhere to get Narzen's delight not be upset, not to mention 17 bottles of herbal decoctions. There are no less effective folk remedies. For example, a phytotherapist from the Belgorod region, Anatoly Petrovich Semenko, drives out the sleeper from the gamer's puffiness. For one session, he gives the patient a poisonous decoction of sweet bitter aftertaste to drink. He suggests to instill into the nose juice squeezed from cyclamen root, and after that to rinse it with a decoction of plantain. From the poison, Slezhevic becomes delirious. He seeks salvation and finds it in the sweet decoction. As a result, polyps and even cysts come out with the roots. During this time, a person begins to sneeze so strongly that the fruit bodies fly out of the nose like corks, and no surgery is needed. However, it should be remembered that all these healers recommend using only fresh juices from raw vegetables and high-quality fruits. Never use spoiled fruits under any circumstances. Otherwise, as practice has shown, instead of benefit, you can get harm, and it's not wise. Even in the last century, scientists discovered several types of pathogens that cause various diseases in plants. Some cause root tumors in cabbage club root. Others cause cancer in potatoes, tomatoes, and other nightshade crops. It is not excluded that similar parasites from plants can transfer to humans. The same instigator caused mass diseases of coconuts and people in the African Republic of Chad. Don't bring it to the end. The fungus can live in the human body for years in the form of a slimy mass, which does not cause much harm, says Lydia Vasilyevna in conclusion. But in favorable conditions it is capable of forming a fruiting body in 3 to 4 days. Then it will be extraordinarily difficult to fight it. Therefore, the task of the treating doctors is to timely remove the mucus from the body. According to Kazimina, the slug is a very delicate and fragile creature that is easily scared. It can be easily frightened off its settled place. On the other hand, it is very trusting. It can be easily lured with sweet juice. Therefore, we should not kill slugs, but gently lure them outside. If we start fighting with the slug, we will inevitably suffer damage. After all, it is much better than a human at adapting to unfavorable environmental conditions. In extreme cold, lack of food, pressure changes, high doses of radiation, and similar stresses, the plasma turns into a thick solid mass in which the cells hibernate, like in a liturgical sleep. In such a state, they can survive for decades without food and water. A known case exists where a Sclerotia fuliga hibernated in a herbarium for 20 years before unexpectedly reviving. That's why Kazmina believes that treating diseases caused by chlamydia with tetracycline is not appropriate. These parasites die and other parts of the tear duct remain, but it turns into a Sclerotia with a fright. A similar effect is caused by many other drugs. It is very difficult to revive Sclerotia in the human body. Therefore, it is not worth driving the poor tearer to such an extreme. It is better to soothe him slowly, surviving from the body. For example, lift the mushroom and something tasty for yourself, steam with it in a jar, and then spread out, having said goodbye to the light steam. Do not take these words as a joke. After all, Russian people have historically driven all thieves out in the bath. Kazmina Lydia Vasilyevna continues to work as a laboratory assistant at the Department of Internal Affairs clinic in the city of Belgorod. Dear woman, here is a recipe for extracting the mushroom alicogal from the nasopharynx. 2 drops of Pozlina sweet bitter tincture on 50 grams of water to drink in 1 gulp. After 2 hours, instill 2 drops of cyclamen tincture into 1 nostril. After 15 minutes, instill into the second nostril 2 drops of cyclamen. After 30 minutes, rinse the nasopharynx with a decoction of oak bark. So, from her words, many people, adults and children, were cured of the common cold. Published in Postscript. And remember, just by changing our consumption, we together change the world.